Yeah, I'm like 2 months late to when I said this video would be uploaded, but give me a break. I've had a lot on my plate. I could have made this video like a month ago if I wanted to just talk about how this thing is good for game streaming and emulation, but you guys just had to tell me to test Winlator, which I'm not joking, stole so many days of my time trying to get it working. We'll touch on that a little more later. Let's get into the actual review. This thing has been such a conundrum for me to review because I've been struggling for weeks to get any words down on the paper. That might be because I've been trying to test out Winlator and getting that to work, which you guys told me to do. But I think it's also because there isn't much different about this device compared to a lot of other devices on the market. That's not to say it's not a great device. I think it is. It's just that so many things it can do, other devices can do better for cheaper. And it doesn't help that its design isn't the most unique thing ever. You know, for as much as I hated the Pocket Micro, at least its design was pretty cool and unique for this market. This just feels like if Ionio's Windows handhelds ran Android instead. It's not very unique and not that exciting. But let's not be so critical. Everything feels really good. The joysticks feel really good. I've been using these white caps on them because the left one is stained red. That's not something I should really contact them over, but it is annoying enough to ruin the white aesthetic we have going on here. So I'm using the cap for that reason. The joysticks are removable and also Hall effect, which should surprise absolutely nobody. They feel really good without the caps. I just have the caps on for the reason I just laid out. The face buttons are a little smaller than I would have liked. They don't feel horrible, but for such a large device, I wish they took better advantage of the space they have because not only are they close together, feeling a little cramped, the rest of the device just feels like unnecessary empty space. That can be said for pretty much every control method on the front of this thing, but it's especially prevalent for the face buttons because there are 4 of them in a diamond shape. The others at least feel like they have enough room to breathe, especially the joysticks considering they move around a lot. These just feel clumped together. Again, they don't feel bad, I just wish they took more advantage of the space they had. Speaking of other control methods, the D-pad feels pretty good. I personally prefer D-pads that are very clicky, that feel like a mouse or keyboard click, but this one feels really good regardless. It's not super clicky, but it has weight to it. Clicking it requires some effort, and it's not a shallow or long click, which makes it feel really nice. It's also just designed really well. It's really smooth along the edges, and rocking my finger across it feels really nice. I haven't dealt with any misinputs on here, and I don't think I will. It's really easy to tell where you hit it. It's honestly really weird because they managed to make a D-pad that isn't really that clicky at all, and isn't unoriginal and styled like every other D-pad ever made. I really like it. Moving on from that, the bumpers and triggers on here aren't much to write home about, but they're still really good. The bumpers are clicky enough, and the triggers are Hall sensing analog, which I guess is cool. Analog triggers are really important for racing games and retro emulation and stuff like that, but I gotta be honest, I have no idea what Hall sensing does for triggers. You know what? Let me Google it. Okay, so I just looked it up, and I guess it has something to do with the longevity of the unit. I don't know, Google is surprisingly not helpful at all on this topic. I'm sure it's a good thing, but I just couldn't tell you why. If someone knows and it's not just about the longevity of the unit, can you let me know in the comments because I have no idea. Anyways, the triggers feel great and I have no complaints about them. This device as a whole just feels really good. The ergonomic grips on the back do a lot to make the gameplay experience more comfortable. Yes, the fat grips do make it less portable, but look at this thing. You're not carrying this thing around in your back pocket, so it doesn't really matter. The whole design is great. It feels comfortable to hold for long periods of time, and aside from the face buttons, which I think feel a little cramped, all of the controls do as well. This device has an 8600 milliamp hour battery, which is the biggest battery by far I've ever seen in an Android handheld, and I think the biggest one I've ever seen in a Windows handheld. And it holds up really well. Yeah, the battery's gonna drop quickly if you play high-end games, obviously. But if you're just playing like GameCube or Wii or those kinds of games, the battery's gonna last you a long time. I haven't had it die on me yet. That's not to say you won't, but this is a really big battery, so regardless of what you're doing, it's gonna last longer than most other handhelds anyway. Just maybe don't leave it in sleep mode for more than like 24 hours because it will die in sleep mode. All of these devices do die in sleep mode after a little bit of time, and it is very annoying to come back to the device after a little while and find it dead. So keep that in mind. Moving on from that, this whole device is designed around this big, beautiful screen in the middle. It's a 7-inch 1080p OLED 165Hz bezel-less display. And I have to say, it looks pretty good. Just looking at it straight on, it looks amazing. But actually using it in game, oh boy, it's no competition. The colors really pop. The OLED display is beautiful, and it being in line with the rest of the device so there is no bezel is just incredible. It's probably the most beautiful display I've ever seen in any kind of handheld, not just Android. It just looks really nice. I don't think there's much more I can say to make you understand how gorgeous this thing looks. I mean, here are some clips showing off how gorgeous it is in certain games, but my camera can only show so much. You'd have to be holding it in your hands to really see just how nice it looks. One thing I can complain about it though, it looks really bad at low brightness. I'm not sure why, but at its lowest setting in a dark environment, it looks like it is a dirty plastic layer over the screen. It just doesn't look good. They've released several updates for this thing since its launch, but none of them have addressed this issue, which is a real shame because using it in bed is a no-go for me. Because one, I don't like how it looks in low brightness. Two, I don't want to turn the brightness up. That'll hurt my eyes and wake up anybody in a 30-mile radius from me. Aside from that though, it's a great screen. It looks beautiful, and even if I feel like the 165 Hz part isn't necessary, considering I haven't talked about it at all, and most things I'm going to be doing on here don't utilize it at all, I'm still glad we have it, so I'm not complaining. The speakers sound fine. A few days ago, I turned this thing on and just launched Animal Crossing New Leaf and left the music playing and fell asleep to it, so if it works for me, it should be perfectly fine for you. They're not the most amazing speakers I've ever heard, but they do sound pretty good. They fire downwards though, which if you know my channel, you know I'm not a fan of at all, but they sound fine, so it doesn't really matter. There's a little trigger on the top of the device that switches it between different power modes. Those are battery saving, balance, streaming, game, and max. Each of those is pretty self-explanatory. The switch won't turn on max mode until you go into the Ioneo sidebar menu and turn it on yourself, which comes up when you press the Ioneo button in the bottom right. That menu has a nice performance overlay in its performance section that you can enable along with the performance modes I just talked about. There are a bunch of different options in each section. Gotta be honest, the only thing that mattered to me is the performance overlay that can be enabled or disabled. It's great and I'm glad it's here. I just don't know of any use cases for literally anything else here. Moving on, before we get into actual gaming, let's have a little chat about game streaming. So I've said in the past that this thing might be a great streaming handheld, and it certainly is, but it's too similar to the Retroid Pocket 5 in that sense for me to think of it as any better. First of all, the games look just fine. It obviously depends on the Wi-Fi you're running it off of, but even off of my college's Wi-Fi, the games look fine. Secondly, streaming games through an official app or website like the Xbox Game Pass website that lets you stream games from it, you can't do any higher than 60 FPS even if your display supports it, which is really annoying. Apparently you can with Steam Link, but I tried Steam Link on my college's Wi-Fi. It does not work, so I can't test that out. Anyways, streaming works really well, but it's nothing spectacular, and I wouldn't recommend it just for streaming, especially when other much cheaper devices exist that can do the exact same kind of streaming. Let's move on. So, before we get into emulation, I need to rant a little bit about Winlator. Winlator, if you don't know, is a Windows emulator for Android where you can play Windows games, supposedly, on an Android handheld. I have had no luck doing that. I don't know if I'm just incredibly unlucky with this or what, but I have had zero luck getting any game to work on Winlator. And it's not just this device. If there's anything that made this review take as long as it did, it's Winlator, because I, no joke, probably spent close to 100 hours trying to get any PC games working on here because one person told me to. I looked up and followed a few videos telling me how I could get Steam games working, and to their credit, I did get a few games downloaded, but some of them wouldn't launch, some of them crashed on launch, and others didn't run that well. I also found a ton of people telling me that only GOG games would work, so I downloaded a few GOG games, and guess what? They would install, but either not launch, or would crash after a few minutes of being in the game. And it wasn't even super high-powered games that I was testing out. It was literally Stardew Valley that refused to launch, and the one time it did launch, my controls refused to configure no matter what I did, so I couldn't use them at all. Funnily enough, The Witcher 3 did launch one time, And it kind of worked. After I closed the game, I could never get it to launch again, and I think it broke. But it's kind of funny that The Witcher 3 launched more times and worked kind of better than Stardew Valley did. I just don't understand what I'm doing wrong, because yes, I did try some high-end games, but I also tried out lower-end games, and neither of them would work. So I don't know what I did wrong. I saw videos when I was doing research for this of people saying that they would put Winlator on their Retroid Pocket Mini, and I'm just over here like, I can't even get Winlator to work on this semi-powerful device. How are you getting it to work on your Retroid Pocket Mini? It is so genuinely frustrating because I followed every single tutorial I could find, and even in my notes for this video, I had a section where I was talking about Winlator, and I had a part about it where I thought I got it working just for it to not work and for me to be left confused all over again. I hope that in the future they can refine this emulator to support Steam so I don't need to download 4 unofficial versions that don't even work anyways. I wish I could get this working, but I genuinely have no idea what I did wrong. If you know any alternatives, if you know of any solutions, if you got Winlator to work on any of your devices, let me know in the comments and I will follow what you say because I want to get this working. Alright, rant over, let's get into emulation. I gotta be honest, I'm a little disappointed with how this thing performed with emulators. I don't think anyone is surprised, but everything up to Wii works really well at an upscaled resolution to match the 1080p display. It looks really good. It's just when you get a little higher that things start to fall apart. Wii U games work fine enough. You have to put this thing in its max power level to get games working really well, and even then it has frame rate issues, but it's fine. Some Switch games work better than others. I have had some weird frame rate issues in Pikmin 3 Deluxe, which has been a little confusing, but sadly I can't show you that because I'm scared Nintendo's gonna nuke my channel. And while this is nothing new, we've seen devices that can barely play Switch games before. Those were at least cheap or not big hulking devices you think would be able to play Switch games or at least higher end games really well, especially for that $530 price tag at its cheapest. I get that we're paying for more than just performance, but to put this all into perspective, the iNode 2 Mini has a better chip in it and can play Switch games almost perfectly with just whatever issues Yuzu for Android has for at least $130 cheaper. Sure, you're missing the 165 Hz OLED display, but be real for a second. The highest frame rate you need for Switch games and a lot of modern games is 60 frames per second. So you're not really missing out on that much. And the Mini has a mini LED display, which isn't as nice as the OLED display, but in my opinion looks better than a normal LCD display. So it's a give and a take. It's just frustrating because I want to recommend this thing because I love it, but I just have no reason to. There are just so many other devices that can do what this thing can do and more for cheaper. This isn't a Pocket Micro situation where at least the design was something I hadn't seen before. This is the same design as some of their Windows handhelds for a higher price than other Android handhelds that can do more. I get that the G3X Gen 2 processor, which this thing has in it, is pretty new, but the performance to price ratio is what's throwing me off. I know it may not sound like it because I've been ranting for the past few minutes, but I actually do love this thing. Its screen and design is what makes me love it so much. But the fact that its cheapest model is $530 while it can't even play Switch and Wii U games that well is what's throwing me off the hardest. Sure, it's good for game streaming, but this isn't even like the Retroid Pocket 5 where I can recommend it for just that because the Logitech G Cloud is like $300 cheaper than this. So I can't even recommend it for that. I honestly don't know how I can recommend this device. If you want a device with great ergonomics, a bezel-less 7-inch 165 Hz display, a huge battery, and can barely play Wii U and Switch games without stuttering, then this is the device for you, but I don't know who would want that. Before I started writing this script and when I still had hope for Winlator, I was planning on centering this whole review around playing PC games on a high-end Android handheld, because that is much more interesting than my usual review talking about Android emulation or game streaming on an Android handheld. But when Winlator fell through, that's when this whole idea fell through. I just pivoted to what I know best. I don't know. I really like this device for what it is, but there's like no one I can recommend it to because it's not all that powerful and it's really expensive. It's like the worst of two worlds. If Winlator worked better, then maybe I'd have a talking point, but I just don't because it didn't work. Unless I'm making some fatal mistake. But I can't imagine anybody else is going to have any better luck than I will. So I can't recommend it for Winlator either. The screen is beautiful and it runs retro games really well, but it's like, I'm not going to recommend this for the screen alone. And there are other devices with worse screens that still look really good and can play retro games or even modern games better. So there's just no one I can recommend this to. But what do you guys think? Is there something I missed out on that actually makes this device worth it? Do you own one and like it more than I do? Do you own one and hate it more than I do? Is there some fatal mistake I made while trying to get Winlator working that would actually get it to work for me? Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye!